We're delighted to welcome Dr. Pippa Whitehouse, who is an associate professor at Department of Geography at Durham University, for an interview to celebrate International Women's Day as part of our Ustinov Meets series. The theme for International Women's Day this year is Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World, with the tagline, Choose to Challenge. We're very pleased to welcome Pippa to speak about her experiences and career to date. So thank you very much, Pippa, to talking to us as part of our activities for International Women's Day. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career?
Of course. My name is Pippa Whitehouse. I work in the geography department here at Durham, and I have a joint role, so I do some teaching and I do some research. So it's a full academic position, and my research is mainly about Antarctica. But it's been quite a long journey. But I have studied Antarctica for about 10 years now, so there's plenty of research to keep me entertained there. I'll give a bit of background of how I got there. I didn't plan to study Antarctica. I guess at school, I really enjoyed maths and science. I was very good at those. I also enjoyed geography. I didn't really know how to fit these together. It took me a long time to work it out. But something I was really lucky with at school is I was at a girls' school. And so no one really made it an issue that I liked maths or science. No one said, oh, well done, you're a woman and you like science. It was just like, that's Pippa, she likes science. And I think that was a really helpful background to come from. I didn't feel like it was unusual. And then I had this tension, like maths, geography, science. I studied maths at university. It was really hard and very difficult to and different to maths at school. And so that was a difficult transition because at school I was used to doing very well. Suddenly at university you struggle. It's meant to be very, very difficult. And I was, at that stage I was a minority. There were not many women studying maths. In my college I was the only woman doing maths. But again, I was very lucky that I didn't feel like I was different. I think in maths there's not so much sort of interaction like you do have. If you're doing geology, you have field trips and things. Maths, you just sit down and do some equations. And so people were very supportive, and we just all found it very difficult. And so I didn't feel like I was sort of different as a woman, so that was quite nice. And I finished my maths degree, and I thought, right, this is my chance to get back to my love of geography and studying the planet. So I applied to do a PhD in geology or earth science, essentially. And then it got really hard because I didn't have a degree in geology or anything like that. I desired to study it, and so I did a PhD, and I looked at studying plate tectonics. So this idea that the world is slowly moving, and as the plates collide, you get earthquakes and mountains. But I suddenly had to read papers and sort of discuss my ideas and build an argument. And I was very used to things being right or wrong. So being a PhD student was the most challenging. That was the biggest change in my life. But I got there, I managed to get my PhD, get a postdoc, and get on that difficult track of career in academia. And then about 5 years after my PhD, I studied sort of ice sheets and sea level change. We can talk a little bit more about that for a few years. And then there's a job about Antarctica came up, and I was really lucky to get that. And I was actually a researcher for a long time. So I was a postdoc for about 14 years, moving between different posts, moving between different countries as well. So I know what it's like to study somewhere which is an alien culture, an alien language. So I have a little bit of sympathy for some of our students. And then I've been sort of a full-time academic for the past few years. And so quite a long journey, and some changes in direction, which are challenging, but I think build you up to be quite a stronger, more interesting person.
Thank you for your very, very detailed sharing. And I was like thinking about our International Women's Days theme this year is about women in leadership. And so the slogan is going to be choose to challenge. And I heard a lot of your stories about bouncing between different departments and areas and researchers. And so how do you think this slogan, choose to challenge, mean to you personally and professionally? Is that why you choose to like try so many different career paths?
I think so. I do challenge myself. I don't always think about how difficult it's going to be, and I think that served me quite well because you sometimes leap into a new thing, a PhD or a new job, and suddenly you're doing it before you realise that it's a new challenge. And you just have to adapt very quickly. And as I've got further in my degree, I've learned to be more honest about when I'm struggling. Certainly, when I was a PhD student, it was so difficult, and I didn't want anyone to know that I was confused or didn't know what to do. And so when my peers were very, very supportive, it was, this was 20 years ago. There was a start of a conversation around supporting and sort of embracing that sort of idea of not being brilliant at everything. But as I've come on, as I take on a new challenge, I'm very quick to speak up and say, okay, I'm struggling here, or I'm stuck, I need a bit of help. And there's always someone else in the room that says, actually, yeah, I was a bit confused about that as well. So I think it's good to challenge yourself. I'm the sort of person that grabs opportunities and wants to do things. But then I sort of have to sometimes like build up that structure around me to actually achieve what I set out to do, because it's not always very easy.
Absolutely. So sometimes willing to challenge yourself is crucial, but also you have to ask for help when you need it. And the people are always going to be supportive whenever you need help. This is the most important things about the social connection here. Thank you for sharing that with us. Yes. And so about challenging yourself, and again, we have to mention that you have done a lot of great work in Antarctica, right? And many people definitely have preconceptions about what it would be like to be in Antarctica. So did it meet your expectations, or did any aspects of that experience surprise you?
Yes. Well, so there's two answers here. Did it meet my expectations? And actually, outside being an academic, I love the outdoors. And back in 2000, a long time ago, I went to Greenland on a mountaineering expedition. So I was still a student, and you don't have much money. And we went out and we explored this area in Greenland with these mountains and beautiful ice sheets. So I'd actually been in an environment which was very similar to Antarctica. So in that respect, I knew what to expect, and it certainly lived up to it. I think the most striking thing about Antarctica is the silence, and there's just nothing there. There's no noise, unless there's a storm, and then it's really noisy. But it's absolutely silent and peaceful. And because when I go to Antarctica or Greenland, it's in summertime, then you have 24-hour daylight. So even when it's in a blizzard, it sort of feels sunny still, because everything's white and very bright around you. So those experiences of being in those environments, I had experienced it a long time ago, and absolutely loved that. So really enjoyed going and experiencing that again. But when I went to Antarctica, that was very different. It was for work. And so when in my previous expedition, we were winging it a bit. We were students. We weren't completely safe. You have to be very safe when you're working in Antarctica. So I travelled down with the British Antarctic Survey, and there's a lot of training, and there's a lot of rules around how you behave. And that's all around keeping everybody very safe. But it doesn't mean you don't have fun. And I think I expected those to be those rules, but what I didn't expect was the experience I had with the people down there. So you go into an environment. So when I go to Antarctica, I'm usually on one of the British bases. and there may be sort of 60, 70 people, nobody else. And you arrive, you're the new person when you arrive, you come in on a plane with a few other people, everyone looks at you, it's like, oh, who are the new people? And within a few days, you pretty much know everybody. You haven't quite got all their names, but you know everybody, you know where everyone fits in. And that's your community. And as you walk around the base, every time you pass someone, you talk to them and you ask them how they are, what they're doing, can you help them with something? And that experience of being in a closed community that has to function really well. You know, if you don't get on with someone, that's going to be a problem. And so I'm really focusing on how we interact with people around us, really interesting. And people do strange things in Antarctica. They help you when you weren't expecting it. So there's one example. So every now and then you're on duty. You have duties around the base, and I was emptying the bins one day, and that involves collecting all these bins together. So in Antarctica, you recycle everything. There's about 10 different bins for paper and plastics and all sorts of things. So you have to get all these bins, and then you carry them to the recycling building. You have to put all the rubbish in the right place, and it's quite a big task. And I do it straight after breakfast time, and there's lots of people coming out of the dining room and milling around. And as I'm moving these bins back and forth, I suddenly realised someone disappeared. You know, what's going on? And people have just helped out. So people just pick up the bins and they come along and they do it for you. And that's just what happens when you suddenly, you're in a community where everyone looks out for each other. So that was actually really surprising. And some of my favourite memories is really joint memories of the landscape and the scenery, and also this experience of the people who were there as well.
That's very great. Yeah, I was thinking the Antarctica will be and must be very peaceful, but the people like supporting you and always trying to help, this is something actually very surprised. And I'm very amazed that you have such a great experience in Antarctica and in the base, and you really have find your like community and really belong one. This is really great. And thank you for sharing that story. And I think all of our academias have to stick together. And so your current research focuses on the glacial isostatic adjustment, and which I understand is the response of the Earth system to changes in ice and ocean loading during the glacial cycles. What led you to this area of research, and why do you think it is very important?
I ended up in this area by accident. As with many academics, we don't always have a plan. So I mentioned in my PhD, I studied sort of plate tectonics, how the plates move and collide and you get earthquakes. And I was writing, so my day-to-day, I write a lot of computer code. That's sort of my right. That I use. And I could do that, but I didn't really understand what was going on. What causes an earthquake? We still don't know. And the things that are happening are, very, very deep in the earth, take a very long time. And I found that really difficult to grapple with. And we used to have these speakers, so department speakers, every couple of weeks. And literally, the only talk that I understood, and I'm happy to acknowledge that now, I was very confused in many seminars. The one I understood was about this subject, glacial isostatic adjustment. And the speaker, someone called Glenn Milne, he explained how an ice sheet grows. And that balances with sea level. As you grow an ice sheet, the sea level must go down. As the ice melts, the sea goes up. And he explained how the earth gets squashed, and it subsides and grows again as the ice pushes down on the land. And you combine those three things. You've got the ice sheets and the ocean and the solid earth. And that is the story of climate change, essentially. We look at glacial cycles. We look at how the changes in the climate impact the ice sheets and how they then impact the sea level. And it just made so much sense. I could picture that in a way that I couldn't understand how an earthquake works. I could picture an ice sheet growing and shrinking. So I got into that. And this was a really, really sort of multifaceted area. So I write computer code, that's my expertise. But what I do is I run predictions of how the ice will change, how the sea level will change through time over thousands of years. And I need to check if my models are correct. So I work with loads and loads of different people. I work with geologists who sort of say, yes, this is the evidence for how big the ice was, how big the ice sheet was. I work with people that look at past sea level, what was the height of the sea level. I run, so when I'm in Antarctica, what I'm doing is I'm collecting data from instruments that are bolted into mountains, so that in the middle of the ice sheet, mountains stick up. And then measuring the position, the height of the mountains. And what happens, it's like a set of scales. As the ice is shrinking and it's melting into the ocean, then the land underneath is rebounding really slowly. And we're measuring that with these instruments. And so I can take these measurements, compare them with my models, and I work out, there's always an extra thing to tune in a model, a little parameter to change. So I'm constantly working with lots of different people. I think the most interesting bits of my research is when it goes wrong. And so we run a model, we think we've done everything right, and you get to new observations, you think, well, I'll test my predictions, how does it do? And then you just look and you think, well, it doesn't work. And actually I wrote a whole research proposal, it's my best research plan ever, because I'd done some work for a couple of years. I got a reasonable answer, but there was this sort of like weird discrepancy between what I expected and what I got. And I thought, hang on, I think I know what's going on. And I was basically the only person that had spotted this and come up with an answer. And so that's when science gets really exciting, when you actually go, okay, there's always more to do here. So I'm absolutely really enjoy finding out more and more about it, but also because it takes me in so many different directions and sort of tells me about the climate system. It's really inspiring.
Thank you for that. And I really appreciate what you have done with your work, because as I was a little girl and my mom asked me, who would you like to be in the future? And my answer is always scientist. Well, however, I end up working with law, which is fabulous. But I mean, you have to find some subject that really speaks to you. And I think to comparing your model and what is really going on is one great way of doing that. So thank you for your work so far. And it is really nice to hear that some scientist is really doing their job, and great job. Thank you. And so I also know that you have also focuses on communicating science to a non-expert audience through a lot of web articles, and also you have fieldwork blogs and outlining your experience in Antarctica. How amazing! So could you explain why you feel this is important?
So as you saw a minute ago, I quite enjoy talking about my science, and it's a really important subject to try and understand what causes Antarctica to change, how quickly it's changing, how do we know how quickly it's changing, what's the evidence, and how's it going to change in the future. And there's always, sort of people have a headline story of what they think is happening, past the ice sheet, or maybe it's not melting, someone told me it wasn't. So it's very important to talk to people about, the little bit of the details of what's going on. And I know through my experience as a student and from lecturing undergraduates, it's very difficult to learn something if someone just tells you information. You don't take it in very easily. So I like to think about, how am I going to get someone interested in this? So rather than me telling them information, what can I say that's going to make them come back and go, well, but what about this? But why is that? So I find that really interesting to sort of challenge myself to get people interested. You actually learn some interesting, it makes you think about the science in a different way. So I gave, when I was in Antarctica on the base, we have these weekly talks. So people on the base give a talk about the research, and I gave a talk. And it was for everyone on the base. So you've got the doctors, you've got the cooks, the people that fly the planes, not all scientists by any means. And I gave this talk, I thought carefully about how to pitch it. And I got more questions from them than I've ever got in a science audience. And were way more diverse, because people ask you things that you don't expect. they're not thinking like a scientist. They're just thinking, well, okay, I'm going to ask this question. And so it really challenges you to talk to them now. So that's really cool. And another reason for doing it is because I see this a lot with PhD students. You get very involved in your science, and PhD students and beyond. And you ask a PhD student, tell me about your PhD, and they go off at high speed with technical detail. Not all of them, I should say, but when you're first starting, and it's very difficult to get them to stop, telling you about the latest results and details, because they lost me 2 minutes ago. And to explain to people that actually, if you want to engage people in your science and get them interested, you need to think about how to communicate that. And sometimes it's to your supervisor. You can be super technical, technical audience, but sometimes it's to your mum or something. And so it's a very important skill to step out of what you're doing right now and just think about how can I explain that to different groups of people. And I really enjoy that challenge.
Yes, and I think it's always about that getting a different perspective from different people. Yes, for me, and I'm studying law, and everything about law is regulation and provision, something like that. And so one of my best audience, the first is my best friend who studied designing clothes in America. And she was like always tell me to improvise and go vogue and enjoy your thinking and your thoughts. Yeah, let them take you wherever you are. This is my first biggest audience. And second, and is my mother. And my mother was so bored by me by constantly input her with a lot of knowledge about law. But my mom is really great as an administrator. And so she can provide me a lot of advice when it comes to social networking and talking with people. And this is something I also think academics can really work on. So yes, perspectives. And I really think that you share knowledge with non-experts is absolutely amazing. And I'm sure going to look at your blog later. Thank you. So thank you for that. You're also an accomplished athlete and have performed at international level. Oh my God, that is like a dream job. Could you tell us a little about your sporting experience and how the skills that you have developed are applicable in your wider career and research?
Absolutely. Yes, so that's the other part of my life. There's sort of two of me. Parts of science, parts of and as you said, in the introduction, it's quite difficult to juggle that sometimes. But it's I do like to be bored, so I wouldn't have it anymore. I would say that there's two ways in which I do sport. I'll explain what I mean by that. I do sport because I love it, and it's really fun, and it just feels good to be doing sport. And I also do sport because I love winning things. I think I have to be honest and acknowledge that. And I've gone in quite a sort of come back to the start. That's when I was a kid. I loved sport. Did every sport because it was fun. And then you start to get good and you start winning, and that ambition takes over. And I'll talk a little bit more about what the sport was in a moment. But I've come out the other side now, so I'm no longer an elite athlete. My body's sort of breaking down a little bit, but I still know that I love sports. So it's back on my terms, and it's back on just doing it because it's fun, and it doesn't matter if I'm rubbish. In a way that 10 years ago, it really did matter if I was rubbish. So it's important to sort of acknowledge this. I have two different sides to sport very much. So I've done lots of sports. Sort of, gymnastics and swimming and all these things. I wasn't very good at team sports. There's probably some deep psychological analysis you could do with that. But I love running. I love running around in the woods, in the hills. And I didn't even know the existence of the sport I competed in until I was about 20. And it's a sport called orienteering. And what this involves is you're running in the countryside, often in a forest. And you're given a map, and you have a series of points that you have to go and visit to prove that you've been round. but there's nothing to tell you how to get there. You have the path, you have a compass with you. So the challenge is to navigate through the terrain, to make a plan. You might think, well, I'll run along this footpath, but then there's no footpath where I need to get to. Am I going to go over the hill? Am I going to sort of take the rocky route, or the bit where you cross the stream and stuff like this? And I tried this at the end of my undergraduate. My friend did it. We were both in the running team, and she said, "Look, I think you should try this." And I was absolutely hooked straight away. And I was also utterly rubbish straight away in quite a catastrophic way, because I was quite a good runner, sort of that average runner, represented my university. And if you're a good runner, you can get lost very quickly. So what happened was I would set off thinking, well, this must be the direction to go and find the points, and I could run a couple of kilometres in a quarter of an hour, and I disappeared out of the forest and out the other end. And so I got really lost quite a lot in the first few years. But I could sort of see that if I could do the physical side. I could run through tough terrain. It's muddy, it's hilly. I could do all of that. If I could just sort my head out and get myself going in the right direction, then I might do all right.
Right.
And that was a real learning lesson, because I don't like failing at things. I don't like being wrong. And every time I got lost on a course, I'd get cross. I'd be angry with myself. And I slowly realised that I can't do that if I'm going to be good at this. I need to accept I'm going to get a bit lost. But if I can deal with that, sort of catch that mistake before it's too serious, then actually it's going to go all right. And so by the end, I sort of started when I did my PhD, and so a real juggling act. And by the end of my PhD, I made the British team for the World University Championships, so sort of the university team. And then I was in the British team for sort of the next 6 or 7 years, as I was doing a series of postdocs in different countries. So quite a challenge. So I've sort of travelled around the world. I've raced in international competitions, in all sorts of terrain as well. So you have to be very adaptable. You don't know what the course will be. You've never been to the place where the race is going to take place. And as soon as you're out there, your brain's firing as much as your body is firing, and you're trying to take in information and sort of make plans and adapt to it. So it's very much a mental sport as well. Sports ratio. I think there's a couple of things I take away from it. It helped me deal with pressure. So if you think about it, lining up at the start line of the World Championships with a big crowd is quite frightening. And so you have to learn to deal with that, because you trained all year for this race. And it's no point in blowing it because you're a bit nervous. So you learn to deal with pressure. You learn to focus on the process of what you need to do. And I think a parallel is in my work is when I had to give a talk at a really big conference, and I still get really nervous before the talk. But I have a plan and I'm prepared, and as soon as I start talking, it's absolutely fine, and you sort of get into the run of it. So that's something which I've definitely taken from my sport. And another thing is I had to be very self-motivated. So this sport, orienteering, it's not heard of by everybody. It's quite a small sport. There are not many clubs, not many coaches. As I trained myself, most of my training was me planning my training, doing my training. So there's no one telling me what to do. No one saying that you've got to get better, you've got to achieve. So to succeed, particularly in that sport where there's such a small infrastructure, I really had to be very motivated. And I carry that over to my work as well. I knew I had to be quite organised. I had my training, I had my work, and I wanted to do both of them. So it's very much a sort of a parallel there. And I just want to say that the last thing I really took away from doing sport is learning to fail, as I said before. And I changed as a person through my sporting career. And when I came out the other end of it, I was comfortable with failing in a way that I wasn't before I'd gone through that process. And that's probably the most useful thing that has come out of that whole experience, as well as all that fun of doing sport.
Thank you for sharing that. And I am absolutely connected to all your stories. I was like forcing myself to running every day. And so for now, I can run 6 to 10 kilometers every day. But back in a while, when I was a child, I was also training for competition. And I was like, aiming for top 10 at least. Okay. Of course, in the amateurs group. Okay. But somehow my ankles and my knees are breaking down. And I told my mom, oh my God, it's just so suffering for me because everybody else is faster than me. But I know I can. I just cannot with my current physical situations. So I think definitely learn to fail and embrace your failure, because sometimes they will come out as some kind of positive experience. And it will also like help you to build a very healthy mentally and also physically. And it can also work well when you are studying and do something else with your life. Thank you very much for telling all the 3 things you've taken away from your sporting experience. And the next question is that what was the greatest piece of career advice that you have been given? And what advice would you give to someone who is also embarking upon their academic career today?
Oh, that's a difficult one.
That's huge.
It's huge. I think rather than a piece of advice that someone has spoken to me, there's an article I read a couple of years ago, and I think it's called The Importance of Being Stupid. It's something like that.
Okay.
It's written by a scientist, I think a biologist, but it applies to science researchers and academic researchers. And they talk about the journey of being at school, being top of the class, aiming for a good university, going to university. Starts to get a bit hard because all those other people who were top of their class are now in your class. And you may be going to do a PhD. And the writer talks about a situation they just felt like they were getting more stupid in a way through their career, because it's getting harder and harder. And he is a man. He spoke to a colleague, I think it was a postdoc, and asked them a question. How do I do this? And he said, this postdoc has since won a Nobel Prize, so they're incredibly good at their science. And the postdoc replied, I have no idea. I don't know how to do it. And it was a real turnaround moment in this researcher's experience, because they realized that people don't have the answers. And they've been feeling really stupid because they didn't know what they were doing. But the reason you're doing a PhD is because you're doing something that no one has the answer to. And actually, you're probably the expert.
Yes.
And it's a really nice sort of journey through trying to work out your position in life, in society, in research, in whatever. And you always feel like people are a bit better than you, but actually, people are just very, very different. And everyone has different knowledge, something different to contribute. So you might feel stupid, but actually that's important. You're doing it right. So that was an article, a short article, which I found really opened my eyes, made me feel a bit better, basically. And if I say someone's starting today, my advice would be try not to focus on specific goals. Rather enjoy the journey and enjoy the process. I've always been goal driven. I wanted to make a team. I wanted to get a research proposal funded. And actually, when you get those things, it's not always as exciting, or you're just tired by then. And what I remember from things I wanted to achieve was not the achievement, but what I did to get there. I remember the hard training sessions, or the difficult problems I overcame in my research. So try not to focus on the goals, but enjoy the process and keep being inquisitive and wanting to find out more. And a trick that I have in the last few years, when I fail, there's a recurring theme here. When you get a paper back and someone's criticised it, I try and smile, and I literally oh no, bad. I just sort of step back and I go, okay, this feels bad. We've been here before, and I'm going to deal with it. So smiling at failure is another piece of advice that I try and give to people.
Absolutely, yes. So I will definitely try first be stupid and humble all the time, right? Yes, and second, enjoy the process and third, smile at my failures. Yeah, thank you very much. I think they will navigate me through my PhD journey and also my future career. This is absolutely very, very, very wise suggestions. As a final question, if you could go back and talk to yourself when you were 21, knowing what all you know now, what advice would you give to yourself? You cannot say the three things we discussed earlier. Thank you.
Okay, so something different. So the first thing that strikes me is when I was 21, I didn't really listen to advice. So I probably have to listen to myself. So I'm not going to try and tell myself to do anything differently. But what I would say, reflecting on the time since then, to myself is there's going to be some bad bits and there's going to be some good bits. And I like to try and solve a problem. When a problem comes up, I like to try and sort it out. And sometimes you just can't. And sometimes you just have to wait a little bit. Sometimes it was your fault. Sometimes there was nothing you could do about it. So I would try and tell myself to be a little bit more patient when hitting some obstacles and just take a bit of time. Definitely be more patient with myself. I was always in a rush when I was 21. I'm not so much now.
Thank you. So be patient, but also in the meantime, be confident and have trust in yourself and trust people. Yes, right. That's the crucial thing. And thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pippa, for joining us today and providing us with so many insightful and engaging responses. It has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today.